Hey YouTube, this is going to be a review of the Lee Perfect Powder Measure. Now, I have heard some people express some issues about this powder measure. I've also read a lot on the forums about various aspects of this powder measure, but I haven't seen a lot of great videos, nor have I seen many pictures or examples to kind of provide some more clarity as to the issues people have been experiencing with this powder measure. So I'm making this in order to kind of shed some light on things that I've learned while using this powder measure, some issues I've run into, and some possible solutions that you can try, as well as my general recommendation for this powder measure. So this is the pamphlet or the manual for the powder measure, and on the inside has a lot of great detailed information about how to set it up, how to calculate your grain weights for your very first charges, and if you look on the very back, it has just a variety of volume densities that you can use as part of the calculations in order to set up kind of your initial volume as you start to charge cases. So I'm going to pan over to my powder measure, which I have set up. And as you can see from this, it's pretty small, very compact size, which is great for people who maybe have some limited bench space. Now, the entire body, for the most part, is a nylon material and plastic components. There are some metal components, as you can see here on the actual volumetric cylinder that measures the volume, as well as kind of the lock ring on the pour spout and the handle that's attached to the drum. So there's some really unique things about this powder measure that I really like. There are also some issues that I've experienced, which I will go into, but just for a general overview of the powder measure, on top you have a powder canister that you can fill. This detaches from this cap. Just unscrew it and it opens up. It's open top. You can pour powder into. And then you have the cap that goes down into a funnel. This is the actual body of the powder measure, and you have your cylinder that measures the volume, and you have the pour spout, the handle, and then on this side you can also see that there is a tensioning screw that can actually help you kind of determine the tension that you want, and I'll explain all this a little bit more detail. And then at the very top you see this little piece that's kind of flagged out, and I'll kind of point you on the other side right here. That's one of the stops, and then there's another stop at the bottom. So essentially you can only pull it up to that stop and then down to the other stop in order to actually do a full cycle of this powder measure. So some things that I've experienced when I first started using this canister, there was a lot of static in the canister, and so what would happen is as I would pour powder into it and try to empty, a lot of the powder would be stuck to the top, stuck to the sides, and additionally when I tried to pour it back into the actual stock bottle for the powder, the static would cause the powder to go all over the place and make a huge mess. So I have actually started to kind of go away from using this powder canister. And you're like, well, how's that possible? Well, the neat thing about this powder measure is actually this cap in this powder canister will fit your stock bottles. So for Winchester, right now I'm using 244, and for Accurate number 5, the tops of these will actually interface with this cap. So instead of this being the canister, it could be the stock bottle, which I have found a lot of success with doing and actually prefer to do it that way. So that's what I've been doing since. So you pretty much just attach the cap to the bottle. Now on the actual cap itself, there's this tab right here that you can see. And so there's an interface in between this cap and this funnel that allows an opening between the powder and the rest of the body. So right now it's in the closed position, but if I were to turn this, and as you can see, I'm not changing anything about the actual bottle itself, it's still locked in tight. But as I turn this, it actually opens up that hole or that interface in between the canister and the funnel, allowing the powder to drop. So for those of you who may be concerned about, well, how do I get a stock bottle on top of this without powder pouring everywhere, this is how you would do it. Now how this powder measure functions and the way that the majority, or if not all of them, function, is now that the powder would be down here in this funnel, as I rotate this to the stop, now there is an interface in between the powder funnel and the actual cylinder that will measure the volume of powder. And then in order for me to actually charge my case, I would then rotate it. So this is now cutting off that connection between the funnel and the cylinder. And by continuing, it opens up another interface down here with the pour spout. So that's how these powder measures function. They collect all the powder in here and then they rotate to a different opening. Now the nice thing about this Lee powder measure, and if you can see it with this little white tab right here, that's actually a wiper mechanism. It's some sort of plastic or polymer, and it actually runs the length of this body. And what it does is it actually helps wipe that powder as it goes from the transition of funnel to cylinder that measures the volume. And as I rotate it, it's actually going to help wipe off any of that excess, and that will prevent additional powder from either getting into the cylinder or being able to get down into the pour spout. Now, there is a caveat to this. One of the powders, or a type of powder that this powder funnel or powder measure has a really difficult time managing, is your very fine ball powders like Accurate number 5. And so part of this video is going to be kind of explaining my process of managing that and maybe some tips and tricks that you can utilize. So I'm going to show you an example of what I mean. So if I compare the Accurate number 5 powder, it is a very fine ball powder. I mean, very, very tiny. And so when we look at how the actual powder measure itself functions, this is essentially, if I take this and put it right here in front of the die body, or excuse me, not the die body, the powder body, this is what you're looking at. So if I put this in the down position, hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. This is showing you kind of what the body would look like if I were to take out this tensioning screw on the side and to pull it apart. So the tensioning screw that would be located right here is responsible for pulling the inner cone and the outer part of the cone, or maybe the body, pulling them together if I were to tighten it or loosening it up. Now what happens with these very fine powders is they actually find a way, I'll try to use a pen, they find a way to get in between these two surfaces, and then eventually as I continue to rotate, especially on the bottom, that very fine number 5, Accurate number 5 powder will trickle out and start to pour out or trickle out as I continue to operate the body of the powder measure. And so that's an issue that a lot of people have experienced. Now, I've looked at a lot of forums about how to address this issue, and really what I think it comes down to is this is all nylon, and so plastic, whether it's injection molded plastic, which it probably is, or if it's plastic that is kind of machined down or shaved down, there are a lot of surface irregularities in between these two faces that don't allow a perfect mating between the surfaces, and thus you're able to get more opportunities for powder to kind of trickle out, down and out. And this is especially so for the very small powders that can kind of wiggle their way through. So what I did is I essentially took 1000 grit sandpaper and I formed it into this cone that exactly matches what that inner face would be. And what I did is I just kind of put it in my hand, kind of like this, put it in my hand like that, and then I took this cone out, which is right here, and I kind of stuck it together like that and just kept going around and around and around and around and around in order to help smooth out that surface and kind of get rid of those rough bumps. And my thought process behind this was that if I'm able to smooth out these surfaces, I can have a better mating surface between the two components, and hopefully that gap will shrink enough that those small powders like the number 5 powder won't be able to make their way out. and it did help a little bit. The other thing that I tried using as well is after doing that, this powdered graphite, I tried spraying into this gap around here while the dye, or excuse me, I keep saying dye, while the powder measure was apart in order to kind of fill those gaps with additional carbon. Part of your powders have a carbon component, so it's not hurting anything or contaminating your powder charges. But that way it could fill in those additional gaps between those ridges and hopefully result in a better mating surface. So what I saw is after I did that, I actually had a lot less leak of that number 5 powder. And where I was seeing it primarily is one at the wiper. And the reason why that makes sense is that all that powder that's being built up is being wiped away as this handle is being turned, is wiping away all that excess. So that's an opportunity for excess powder to kind of follow along that wiper and come out. So that's where I was seeing it come out. Another place that I saw it come out, and it makes sense if you look at this image, is following gravity. So it's going to fall out from the bottom. So what I was getting a lot is actually powder coming around the base of this cylinder of this body. And so if you can see, if I can zoom in well enough, that's actually some number 5 powder that has come from this part of the body and kind of landed on this spout. So since doing kind of those modifications, I've had some improvement, but still not perfect. So now what I've been doing is kind of just placing this parchment paper down below that will catch in the excess powder, and then I can essentially just roll this up and stick it back into the stock bottles. Now, I didn't have this issue, interestingly enough, when I started using the Winchester 244. And in this, if I do a side-by-side comparison, hopefully you'll be able to see why. The Accurate number 5, I mean, those are just super duper fine ball powders. But when you look over at this Winchester 244, they're still small, but I mean, if you compare the size, they're like anywhere from 3 to 4 times the size of these. And so what I found is that actually when I put this 244 in this powder measure, the leaking problem ceases. And I think it's because those grains of powder are just large enough that they can't fit between this very narrow gap like the small powders can. So those are kind of the tips and tricks that I have. So in just review, 1, actually pouring from the stock bottles, I found that to be very helpful. 2, sanding down the inside components to allow a better mating surface between them. And then 3, pour in or kind of put in some powdered graphite. And while you have the handle and everything off, you can just spin this around and around and around in order to help improve those mating surfaces. And then I guess 4 would be putting some sort of catch underneath. If I had like a 3D printer, I might 3D print something in order to go around this and kind of catch it all and make my own funnel. But this works sufficiently. And with the 244 ball powder, I have had 0 issues with that ball powder spilling out, either coming from around this part of the body or even along this wiper, non-existent. So it really just depends. You might have to play with your powders. You might have to play with the measure. Now I would say that regardless of whether or not powder is coming from the side of the body with number 5 or not at all with 244, this powder is extremely accurate. And I've heard some guys say that, oh, you can't use this for precision reloading. Other guys say that it's basically worthless, don't waste your money. But for a $30 powder measure and something that you can easily make some tweaks to, it's very user-friendly, I have found this to be incredibly accurate. And I'm going to follow this up. I'm going to splice in another video where I actually do some accuracy measuring with it. And hopefully you can see that this measure can work as great as you want it to. Now there are some caveats that I will add in that video, but hopefully this was able to help you kind of get an idea of this perfect powder measure to see if it's something you're interested in and maybe bypass some of those initial frustrations that I've experienced. Alright, so this is the next part of the video. So as you can see here, I have attached this cap to the Winchester 244 stock bottle. And originally it was over to the left, but then I turned it. And so by turning it, you can see this little tab right here goes against the stop. And what that results is the powder going from the stock bottle down into the funnel and touching the body. There's a little connection in between the essentially the funnel and the red cap, which it happens actually right here where those tabs are. That's the junction in between that connection. So once I've done that, essentially all I have to do is just throw a couple of charges initially in order to get everything kind of set. And then after throwing, I don't know, maybe 5-10 charges, you should be good to go. So I have a little Hornady digital scale right here. It's zeroed out with the pan. I also recommend that people get some sort of powder trickle, which is what this is, powder trickler. It doesn't matter if it's Frankford Arsenal, if it's RCBS, Lee, Lyman, they all work the same way. I really like this Frankford Arsenal because it was cheap and it's a full metal body, so it's very stiff. It doesn't get knocked over or anything, and I have found great success in its ability to slowly trickle up and get things metered appropriately. So I'm going to throw a charge or two, and then I will see how consistent we can get these charges to drop with this 244. So hopefully you can see. So I've already dropped a couple charges, but I will drop just a couple more so you can see what the process is. And I just pour that powder into my powder trickler, because what happens is sometimes if you want to, you can make the powder measure drop shy and you can just trickle up to whatever it is. So sometimes I will have it, like in this instance, I'm hoping for it to be dropping 4 grains exactly, but sometimes I might have it drop 3.9 and I can just trickle up to the 4. But for the most part, I haven't had any issues. This powder measure has been plenty accurate, and using this powder trickle is super easy. I just put my finger and just kind of rotate it, and that's all I need. So we'll throw our first charge, and we'll see. Hopefully it comes out to 4 grains. Let that stabilize, and what do you know? Boom, 4 grains. Hopefully that focuses, you can see, and I will throw a few more. Hopefully we get the same result. And what I found is that the key to making sure that this powder measure is dropping the accurate weight every single time is, one, it always helps to tare your scale, because anytime you're adding a whole pan plus the powder to the scale, it can cause the scale to fluctuate by a few grains or point grains. So sometimes you just have to re-tare your scale and go back, and it'll end up being whatever your grain weight or your charge is that you're hoping for. But also doing it consistently, so making sure on this powder measure there's a stop at the top and a stop at the bottom, so making sure I go all the way up to the top and then all the way down to the bottom in a fluid motion, that really helps as well. So that was our second charge, and you can see again we have 4 grains. And I will do this a couple more times for you guys. Sometimes it will drop 3.9 grains, but again, if I just touch my powder trickler, it goes right up to 4, and it's no big deal at all. Some guys don't necessarily want to pour into a pan. Some guys just want to pour right into the case, and that's totally fine. Just know that sometimes there may be a variation, but again, that's our third one, and it's at 4 grains. And maybe I'll do 2 more. Again, up to the stop, down to the stop, put it on our pan, and again 4 grains, and I'll do 1 more just so we have at least 5 throws. Generally when you're doing powders, they recommend, if you're just going to keep loading from the powder measure, that you weigh every 10th charge just to make sure that nothing has changed. But that's charge number 5, and it's still at 4 grains. So the guys who say that you can't get good accuracy with this powder measure, I just disagree. That has not been my experience. I would say caveat to that is I'm only loading handgun rounds, And so those pistol cases have typically lower charge weights for things like 9mm, 40 Smith & Wesson, things of that nature. I have not done rifle rounds. I have not done extruded powders out of this powder measure. But for the Winchester 244 ball ammo, it drops great. It even drops really good for the number 5. And the only caveat, like I said, with that is sometimes you get powder spill out the side, but it will still drop accurate grain weights. The powder coming out the side doesn't really impact the dropped charges. That's just because there's powder leaking out the sides, but it's not any powder that's coming from the actual container. So hopefully that helps you consider whether or not you want to use the Lee Perfect Powder Measure. I found great success, and it's only $30. So I would say try it out, see what you think. Or if you don't want to, that's totally fine as well. But that's my experience. Thanks.